Yeah, there's something I wanted to touch on there. Yeah, so you talk about loneliness, and I think that's very interesting, like word, because I think it's a particular type of loneliness. It's the loneliness of not being a part of the story that everyone else has agreed on.
Mm.
Everyone else has an agreed upon story that this is how we live life, this is how you're supposed to do things, here's how you make decisions. So it's a loneliness in the sense that you are saying like, okay, I'm setting that aside. My friend really likes like Arthurian legends, and likes to talk about the forest adventurous. It's like when they were looking for the Holy Grail, most of that story is them like wandering around in the forest adventurous. We're like, we don't know where the fuck we're going, you know. We're just like, it's getting very comfortable with that and trusting in that. It's like this is what it feels like. I'm going off a path that's like feels comfortable, and I'm wandering. But I will say, it's possible to have companions with you in the forest adventurous, so
Mm.
there is a way that you can actually find kind of a deeper connection and friendship with other co-adventurers that are in that same place. They're like, hey, we're knights searching for the grail. And that actually is that has a better sense of belonging than the belonging of like being part of this other um, normalcy for lack of a better term. So there's that. And I love that's my favorite discovery is like, I want to find other people wandering in the forest. And you find other people wandering in the forest. And you're like, oh, you're wandering in the forest? You're looking for the grail too? It's like, oh, yeah, we're both looking for the grail. It's an amazing feeling. And then what's the other thing you're talking about? You're talking about, oh, yeah, how do you relate to life and use life to apply a life towards your art? So I spent most of my life looking at life as like, how can I use this for art? And there's a way in which by doing that, I actually got in the way of really letting that benefit me. Where it's always like, I'm looking at this tree. Oh, I want to capture this so I can impress people with this cool insight I had about looking at this tree.
Like your analyzing muscles flexing, but your intuition muscles not.
Yeah,
Would you
well,
say?
I would say there's something about it where I was instrumentalizing my experience with life, where my experience with life was only get good insofar as I could use it to create something that would make other people like me, really. Like that's what it comes down to. Like I want to do something where people are going to think I'm cool and they like me and think I'm brilliant. And so I prefer my way of relating to life. You talk about like going out, you know, being with people you love or going on a hike or however you're engaging with life, like learning the skill of savoring life is now kind of like where I'm at, where it's like um relating to something as some sort of sacred object, right? That has its own life and being able to yeah, feel that deeply, experience
Yeah.
that deeply.
That's promising signs.
All right.
Well, well, oh dear, we can finally get into it.
Yeah.
Happy days. Brandon Dayton, how are you?
I'm
This
doing
fine
well.
evening slash what time is it over there?
Just past noon here. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh
I was
dear,
worried it was going to
yeah.
be like 6 in the morning for you or something. Like, oh, no.
Yeah, so
Oh.
technical difficulty aside, we can get into it. I've never had as many issues in that in such a small period of time. But yeah, so I suppose we should introduce people. Brandon Dayton. Brandon Dayton is a graphic novelist. He's an artist, a designer. He's a stand-up guy. He's the best guy. He's the patience of a saint, we must say. Also, his most notable work, Green Monk. You think the right comment here. Green Monk, Blood of Martyrs. I've done a whole series of it on the channel, so give that a watch. But let's get into it. Brandon Dayton, how are you doing today?
Yeah, good. It's a beautiful day here, so good start of a day. Um, yeah, I'm just excited to connect with some new people. You know.
Yeah, good to hear. Yeah, it must have been something I was watching. I was trying to figure this stuff out. So obviously you're a designer. And what got you into designing or storytelling in the first place?
Yeah. So it's always been, I think, something that I've been drawn to. You know, I think it was very early on that I knew I had intentions to make art in some way at some point in my life. You know, very early influences. I can remember, um, you know, toward the end of grade school for me, things like Little Mermaid, Akira. Those were both like you know, animated features that really had a big impact on me. Batman the animated series was another one, and I started getting exposed to my first comic books, which were things like Judge Dredd, some of the 2000 AD stuff, which is a little unusual. But it was kind of by unusual circumstances that me and my peers were introduced to stuff like that. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Um, you know, a lot of the
And
standard
what
stuff.
is great? So we're from Northern Ireland, Britain. We don't have grade school. What age range is that?
So that's going to be, yeah. So I would have been around. This is all kind of like pre-puberty, puberty. You know, that's when stuff
Yeah,
really hit for me. That like, okay, I got really excited about art, and making art. And I was also just like a totally horrible. I've never been a good student. You know, so there's this other part of me that was like, okay, I like to draw. I'm crap at all this other stuff. So you know, maybe this is the thing I'm going to do. And you know, over the course of my youth, my interests kind of shifted. But it was like animation. It was like when I was at one point, I was like, I'm going to be an animator, you know, and I was just totally enchanted by that. Comic books was, you know, in junior high, middle school, it was very much like, oh, I want to make comic books. And then high school, it was music, you know. That cycle kind of continued throughout my life, even up into to university, where I was like, oh, I'm going to make movies now. And then after I graduated, I was like, I had a hard time finding work doing that. And so I started working as an illustrator. And so I stayed with illustration, ended up working in video games. So I did video game concept art for probably a total of 7 years altogether. And then I finally, you know, talked with my wife and I said, I've this whole time I'm trying to tell my own stories at this, you know, on the side, trying to create comics on the side or write scripts, and I kind of finally decided on comics, and it was just happening very very slowly. And I mean, some of this I spoke with about a little bit on the interview with Jonathan Pajot, but finally I talked to my wife about it, and we're like, yeah, I'm going to quit, and I'm going to focus on making or finishing Green Monk, which was already in process at that time. So um,
So
that's what
you
led
were
me to
you
that
working
phase.
at Pixar, was it when you quit, or was it the?
No, so I worked at it was a division of Disney. Disney had a game studio division, like a video game division at that time. So there's a studio in Salt Lake City that was part of that division. I don't know if you're familiar with Disney Infinity. It's like the
Yeah.
game we have little characters you put on a reader and they come into the game. So our studio was the one that developed that. And it was going great. Like it seemed like it was going great. It was getting more popular with each release. And then out of the blue, Disney's just like, we don't like the risk of having a video game division, so they just shut it all down. So,
Oh,
but an interesting point on that is that studio that got shut down, they fired about half the people. That studio was then acquired by Warner Brothers, and there's the new Hogwarts Legacy game that's just being released, and
mm.
that's the same studio that's releasing that game. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Very good.
apparently it's amazing. So I'm like rooting
Yeah,
for
I've heard lots
my
of good
friends
things
there.
about it. So did
Yeah,
you leave as it shut down, or?
timing was interesting actually. I remember having a chat with some of my coworkers there and just saying like, you know, getting a work in like working as an artist like at a video game studio is funny because there's this sense of stability where it's like, oh, I'm salaried, you know, I've got benefits, and it's very unusual for an artist. But I remember having a chat with them where I'm like, I think that's all bullshit. I think it's just like, you know, studios like they have success and then they shut down, and that's there's just like this volatility there.
Mm.
And so I had decided to leave. I left about 6 months before the studio shut down. So I left. I started making Green Monk, and then I mean it would have been better timing if I stayed because then I would have got a severance package and all that. But yeah, I
Yeah.
wasn't there for the actual shutdown.
So how long do you? I knew you worked on Green Monk for years. Was this so you left? Is that the start of it, or was it like a? How long have you been working on it, really?
Yeah, so the concept itself goes back to college for me. So it's over 20 years old. And when the first like nugget of, oh, here's a story I might want to do. The first mini comic, which is the first time I actually made something, but the first story with Green Monk that I released in 20, let's see, 2009, 2010, something around there. And then it was like, okay, it did really well. It got an award, which is a prominent comic book award. And so I'm like, I should do a follow up. And this is all while I'm working. And there was just a bunch of false starts where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this. No, that doesn't make sense. Maybe I'll do this. This doesn't make sense. And I finally had a discussion with my friend Alan too, who's actually the like one of the lead game designers on this Hogwarts game. Um, and he kind of like convinced me like I need to know why I care about this character. And so that made me like realize like, oh, I got to tell the origin story of the character, like where he came from. And I kind of already knew the seeds of what that was going to be. So I'm like, I'm just going to tell that story. And so I started while I was working at Disney. I'm trying to remember if I actually started this story at EA. I believe it wasn't until I was at Disney that I started Blood of the Martyrs. I started working on Blood of the Martyrs, and it was slow. It was like I would work on a Sunday, I'd work on a page, you know. And I have a family, and the games business is very demanding, and so I made some attempts to try to, oh, maybe I'll do it after work or something, but this is really at a period in my life where kind of the burnout of working in games and being an artist like really hit me, and I got very sick during this time. And so it was slow going. I was like, geez, I'm doing a page a week. I'm never gonna finish this book, you know. So, but then even after I left the games industry, it's like I've been wanting to work on my own for years. And finally I left there and I was like, I feel like I'm in the worst mind state I've ever been in my life. I'm like so depressed. I'm in my basement. It's like dark and cold. And so the pace didn't pick up that much more when I left. I was still like not making very good progress. But I mean, little by little is a learning experience. Is like, okay, what do I want? What do I need to be creative? And eventually, it's like, okay, I have to get out of the house. I picked up another comic job while I was working on it, and that's the Giants Storyteller Giants. I picked up that job, and so I'm like, okay, I can pay for a co-working space. Yeah, right there.
God, yeah.
So I worked at a co-working space while I started doing that, and that like totally changed things. I'm like, oh, I'm out of the house, I'm around other people, and I was just like got into this like routine where I really started making progress. So yeah, it was very a big learning experience. And the whole time I was like, I want to promote this. So I was running a YouTube channel at the same time where I'm like, I'm gonna do a YouTube channel and I'm gonna like make art and just talk about like what it means to make art. So I was doing like a YouTube video like every week. And so it was a pretty intense experience. It was a lot of work. But yeah, I'm happy with the results. So
Yeah, unreal. Really, really, really good.
yeah.
I'm just wondering. So, I read Green Monk quite recently, and then the Taylor's Daughter as well. I just read them sort of back to back and wrote some notes on it. And honestly, I'm just a fan immediately. To be honest, so from a fan, awesome. Really, really enjoy it. But one thing that uh, I want to sort of understand about your mindset is obviously, say you open up a copy of Green Monk, every panel that you've drawn, it's going to be a completely different story to you than it is to my fresh eyes. Right, I see the story of Alexi, and I'm fascinated and I'm gripped by it. But for you, you remember drawing sort of every line there, and you remember kind of the process and the feelings of putting that panel right where it needs to be. I'm wondering,
Hmm.
would you be able to go back into that kind of mindset and talk about that, like when you do open up Green Monk, and give it a fresh new perspective, sort of where you're at now, essentially.
Yeah. So I guess is the question's kind of like what's it like kind of in being in the middle of the creative process? Or is it more like looking back now or Yeah.
Sorry, both. What's the difference? Because what's your perspective of the story while you're in it, while you're writing it, and then
Yeah.
then when it was you finished it, right? That's the final page. It's done. It's out there. You can forget about it, and then looking back on it, however many years ago it did
Yeah.
come out. What's the difference of
Yeah.
how
That's
you relate
that's
to your own story? Because like sometimes you can be so close to something you're writing. It's like you don't really what you don't see the big picture. You start to forget. But then sometimes you may find something you wrote years back and you completely forgot about it, and it's you. Yes, that you wrote it, but you're sort of seeing it from a new perspective.
yeah. Oh man, I mean, I totally relate to that. I mean, especially as I'm thinking about like when I watched your symbolic analysis of it, that very much like resonated with my experience afterwards. So I'll start with the afterwards, then I'll go back to what it was like
Okay.
as I was making it. But it's so interesting that, and they feel very connected, because they're very much as a sense of like, and this is something I'm learning as I create more. There's a sense when you first start of like, I'm going to plan out and build this structure, and I have this plan of how it's going to affect people, and I have these theories about how story is supposed to work. you know but then as I'm actually in the process, there's kind of this discovery of, it feels more like I'm excavating something. I mean, I am creating, I am making decisions, but there's this discovery as well in the process of this thing that comes out, that's like, that's this beautiful miracle that it kind of emerges. So I look back at Green Monk, and I'll read it, and I'll be like, it feels like a message that I've been given, and I didn't even know the contents of the message. I'll go back and read this comic and be like, oh my God, it's about like, the thing that I really connected to in your analysis. That's another thing that I had kind of seen, was like this whole thing about the masculine and the feminine, where it's like, this is what the masculine and the feminine means to me, and this is how I relate to it. Um, so there's so much to it, and I think this speaks to um, like these kind of Jungian ideas of there's something within us that we don't really even fully understand. There's this wisdom within us that we don't really control that well, and so more and more as an artist, I'm like thinking about like, how do I just like get out of the way of that, you know? And I can go back and I can look at the process of making Green Monk. And it was such like a challenging, harrowing process, making this book for myriad of reasons, balancing my life, trying to support a family while I'm making this thing. And the whole time there's just this sense of, I mean, as you guys were talking about it, the sense of like importance, like this is important in some way, and not in a grandiose way, like I'm going to change the world with this, but just a sense of like, that this matters. What I'm doing right now, what I'm telling with this story, like matters in the most important way possible. That it's, there's some in some way I'm being true to something. Um, and I mean, it was like a beautiful experience. Like, I think about the process of making it and the challenges, and you know, I would sit down with a page, and I'm like, here's what I'm doing in the story, and it's like, there's so many challenges. I mean, the layout, figuring out the layout is like, just makes your brain break. I'm trying to figure out the layout, how things are going to go panel to panel, and then it's like, okay, today I'm drawing architecture, and I have no idea how to do this, so I'm going to learn how to draw architecture. And it's like every panel you're coming to a new challenge, and every challenge is like, I have to learn how to do this for this to work. And just kind of that feeling of taking on those challenges and feeling like I was able to create something beautiful out of that. It's like, yeah, I know how to draw a horse. Like, that feels good to know, like, know how to draw a horse, you know. Um,
Yeah, I
so
will
yeah, I
say
mean,
is a masterpiece, I think, anyway. Because one scene flows perfectly into the next, and like it's so coherent. But
hmm,
as you said, it's almost like you're discovering the story on the
yeah,
way during the process, and I completely agree with you. Because say if I'm writing like a short story, like a novel or a poem or like a song, I can't. You can't just okay. I'll do this. You need, or at least I do anyway. I need to experience from the perspective of the story to tell the story. It's a discovery, which I think is interesting because yes, you've got the analysis side of things, but if you can't create the story from there, if that makes sense, it almost is a discovery, and then you can look back, which is quite interesting because I know Jonathan Peugeot talks about this. It's like two different muscles. It's the intuition muscle and then the analysis muscle. But I think they're not two completely disassociated things. I think because I need the primary intuition before I can get in the right trail, if that makes sense. And part of why I think I was able to analyze Green Monk so well is because I really related to that story. I was like, that was my story, being told through this weird semi-fantastical novel. Like, you were sort of telling my story, which is how I was able to relate to it, which is also how because I'm also looking through your other bits of work here, also really good work. And I was like stumped on a bit. I was like, what is this from? And I was thinking, well, I was able to understand the other story because, well, I've seen I was this guy in this situation. And as soon as I said that, I was like, wait a minute, I'm also in this situation. I never released it to myself. And as soon as I released it to my own story, I was able to realize, oh my goodness, this does make sense. If that make,
Yeah. I think just on what Josh is saying there is, and what you were talking about, it almost sounds like you had this kind of sense of duty to finish it. A sense of responsibility. Even though it comes from your own head, you think about the benefits and you think about I mean even the prices that you've paid. It's like, I'm going to pay these prices because I believe one day it's going to be worth it. I find it very admirable that when you said it is like a message from your past self to you now. It's like a time machine that way, and that's the beautiful thing about art and literature and things like that. Because no matter how many times you pass it, on the street, or you open it up for like the third time that month, it's like, oh, I can find something different. There's one part it's full of amazing sort of scenes, but there's one part that I really enjoyed. It was the part where there's the man in the stocks, and he says, "Oh, I'll give," and he's begging for water. He goes, "Oh, I'll give him a drink of water," and he goes, and he actually does, and it's a little sip, and then the guard starts beating him, and then the older guy comes in and he says, "Look, I would probably go if you want to keep your head," because all these townspeople were really, really crazy about beating a holy man. And it got me wondering, it's like, that seemed normal behavior, like you go and you look at someone on the stocks and you show pity to them, and it's like, it's this ideal kind of, oh, if I was in that position, and if I had this kind of, or it's not even if I do, it's I want to be that kind, and I want to be able to put myself out there and be that confident to provide even just a tiny sip of something, despite there being guards. The validation he got was all these townspeople were like, how, like, are angry at the guards. But I find when you relate it to today, you almost wonder, do people take that risk anymore? Do people kind of, just stretch out just for a little bit in order to help what, others are, despite sort of backlash or whatnot? And oftentimes people fear backlash from one individual when you realize that the whole world could love it. Look at Green Monk, for example. I see Green Monk as, you giving that little sip of water to people. Josh certainly relates to the whole story. We feel like we're in shackles sometimes, and then all of a sudden we have this thing that makes us feel freer than ever. And that's the beautiful thing about art. And I suppose I'm wondering, did you, like you said, it's this message that really, really matters. And it's just like, I think that's what this world needs more of, not necessarily in the forms of, well, actually, yeah, in the forms of art and things, it gives us that, sort of quenches that thirst almost. And I think as young guys as well, that we really sort of latch onto that. We're really inspired by that kind of behavior, I should say, and what we can do to kind of change our ways to be more, because it's very spiritual. You've got vows, you've got, especially the really important scene where he chooses a weapon and he refuses and then he picks a blade of grass. Even that, it's so leveled. It's like, I don't want this, but then I do, but I don't, but then it's kind of that tug of war within ourselves, that order and chaos. And it's just a fascinating sort of thing. And I was just wondering, So Josh and I are really, really fascinated by art and creativity and things like that. I've written a number of poems now. I want to publish, but I haven't written nearly enough and things like that. And I've been, as you said, when you were in college, you have this kind of explosion of color and world building and storycraft. I'm wondering how, and just on the backdrop of what I was saying there about you want to tell a story that really matters. How do you transport that sort of burst of creativity into like a path, you know? And I know
Yeah.
you were saying, well, I kind of just, I had that responsibility, but look at the message, the message, the sip of water, that's now in the present. Okay. That was in the past. Now we're in the present. We've got that water. And if you said you're going to continue Green Monk, are you more confident in your ability to continue Green Monk? Or do you still have these kind of explosions in your head where you're like, what do I do?
That's really interesting. You should ask that. And it's interesting. I'm like keying on a few things you said. You said duty at the beginning of that, which, yeah, I'm resonating with that. Like this idea of duty, which is something that I looked at it a different way when I was younger. So I grew up in a religious background. And so it was very much like, what are the things that I have to do? What are the things I'm expected to do to be accepted within this culture, within this community? And there's a difference between that and then having a feeling of duty where it's like, this is what I was meant to do, if that makes sense. And it's a much more embodied feeling. And it doesn't feel like, oh, damn, I've got to do this responsibility. But it's that type of duty is the type of duty that energizes you, right? It's like, it's what gives you fuel to know, like, okay, this is why I'm here, you know? um and you talk about like making the choice of like being brave enough to kind of step out of your comfort zone and to show some sort of act of kindness. And I think certainly like Lexi is definitely this idealization of that for me, where it's like this is the type of person where even if he's not very smart about it, he's like, I'm going to make that choice and kind of like according to my integrity, and I'll learn the lesson that I need to by making that choice. And then this question of like, okay, so there is this like whatever you want to call it, some sort of eros, some sort of like drive to create, and it can be so undifferentiated. It could be like I've got 10 different ideas for the next thing I want to do, and it's like, but what is the choice that I make? And that's like the key to everything right there. It's like, what is the path? Um, and it's funny for me because I haven't really made any art for the last maybe 3.5 years. So after Green Monk, I really stopped making. I had another comic I had started working on, but it was mostly because like I felt like, oh, I need to have something to follow up Green Monk. It's like, okay, what's next? I have to make another comic. I got to pitch something else. I mean, if you want to look at my Instagram, you can see some of this other thing, and I think it's like a really cool project that I was working on. I mean, at some point I would like to return to it, but I went through kind of like my own kind of midlife existential crisis where I came to this insight that like, oh, like my identity isn't as an artist. Like I don't have to identify like that. There was a way in which like seeing myself as an artist was actually restricting me.
Mm.
It was restricting what I was seeing as possible, and I had to let that go and have the courage to say like, okay, even though I've invested in all this, I need to make the next step needs to be I have to have some sort of integrity with whatever the next step is. And it happened to be that it kind of took me away from making art. So yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry. I really
yeah,
liked. I really liked what you said there about making that choice, and also about that kind of this is my identity, sort of this is who I am, but I need to let go of that. Or
mm,
I think the word that comes to mind is expectation. What are the expectations of me to all of these, that, and that then obviously resonates with duty and responsibility and things like that. I certainly feel that, especially with just the podcast and stuff like that we've been working on, Josh far more than me, is the idea that, you know, oh well, do we just follow expectations? Do we go to uni and do we just be this student and then we grow up and we get a job, we have a family, all good things, all things that we feel as young guys are expected on us, but then we have brains, and we have hearts, and we're ready to kind of offer the world, not as if we know better, not at all. It's to show that actually we don't know anything at all on these kinds of levels. And this is why I think reaching out to people in professions such as yourself, as young guys and girls, is so important to, to becoming a better person than they were when they first listened to you, for example. It's about inspiration. You may not feel like a particularly inspiring person, but you can inspire millions as you've done, and it's a really, really interesting perspective to have when you realize actually I have a gift in this, and I have a drive and a sense of duty to do this on the backdrop of everything else. I suppose what you're saying is you just got to listen to that.
Yeah.
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 So back to, so you had this struggle whether like, is my identity an artist? And you're like, well, no, you find that restricting. Did you think of yourself as, oh, I'm an artist, that's why I am, during your process of writing Green Monk, or was this after?
Yeah, very much as I was doing Green Monk, I definitely identified with myself as an artist. And it's not one of these things where I think it's all black and white either. It's kind of one of these things where I kind of let go of a definition of artist that was restricting me, but in the process there was kind of a new definition that emerged that has been more liberating for me, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense. And there's a degree to which that was always there, you know. It's like all the best parts of what I did with Green Monk, like all the most trustable parts of myself, like those kind of those I kept those parts of being an artist, you know. But it was this part that was like making myself miserable, honestly. That was like, Jesus, I have to do this. I've got to do this. I'm a piece of crap if I can't be successful, or whatever it is. There's all these ways it was restricting me and letting it go. Now it's like, oh, creativity is not just me making art, but it's also creativity is like how I get up in the morning, and it's how I relate to other people, and it's the choices I make, and it's how I talk to people. And it's everything. Creativity is just like part of life, and just owning that in a more embodied sense, I guess.
Yeah, for me, I think personally, I would say I'm an artist, at least to some degree. I like making music. I like making stories, that sort of thing, no matter what form it is. I think right now I think I'm called to make some music.
Hmm.
Now, in the same way you were called to make Green Monk, you had all these ideas going back years. What made, what allowed you to prioritize what ideas to finish? Because as an artist, the trouble isn't getting the ideas; it's the finishing of the ideas, really. So, could you
Yeah.
speak to more of your writing process of like how do you've got all these ideas? Which ones do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. This is something I'm starting to uh, understand better. Um, and I'm learning more about. Um, there is kind of a testing process. I mean, there's some people that they can just sync up with like whatever. They can sync up with the marketing machine and the kind of business machine that makes books or comics, and they're like, okay, what is wanted? I'm going to produce that. I'm going to fit it in there, and that kind of doesn't work for me. So for me, it's very much a process of like paying attention to like what is most alive for me, and
Yeah,
that's the main thing. And sometimes it is a little bit like it isn't clear, and so I do have to like, well, let's try some things out. I may try some things out, and as I try things out, it's like, okay, I'm hitting up against a wall here, I'm hitting up against a wall here, and then suddenly there's this feeling, and it's a very embodied feeling. Like it feels like there's suddenly an opening in front of me, like literally there's this sense of like, oh, a path is opening up in front of me. So I try to pay attention to that a lot more. I think we talk about you talk about analysis and intuition. With those types of decisions, analysis can help inform things, but the decision is always coming from a place that's much more mysterious. You want to call it wisdom, something like that. But that's something I feel like I have not. I wish I would have spent a lot more time in my life getting good at paying attention to that.
Yeah.
Like what feels that kind of feeling, what feels right. Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of it. And I'm still in the midst of it. Like that's still the way I live my life now is like, all right, I think this is the next step. And I take a step and I can't see further than the next step. Like it's always like, okay, I don't know what's coming next, but let's do this. And then things
Yeah.
open up a little bit more. Um,
Yes, I sort of was asking that question because I wasn't expecting there to be like some, oh, here's what you do here, because that's part of the process. I don't think it really could be any other way, but yeah, it's like you said, you're sort of amongst this fog looking for the through line, and all of a sudden there it is. But until then, you're sort of bumped into walls, really.
I liked what you said about sort of creativity is all around you. It's a process you involve with every day. Um, so I think it takes. Then you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it takes a bit of loneliness as well. It takes a bit of sitting down. Well, I suppose this is the kind of what people think. Authors and artists are like. They kind of sit in a corner and they sit there and they think up, and then all of a sudden they've got this. But actually, it's as you say, it's walking down the street and meeting someone. And I suppose the skill that I'm trying to sort of learn is how do I take what I've just experienced, whatever it may be, going on a date with my girlfriend, how do I take those feelings and apply them into a character that I'm trying to develop about romance? Or how do I take the feelings of seeing somebody being quite mean on the street, and how do I develop that? And I suppose it's kind of like you're like a vacuum cleaner. You're just taking everything in, and you're wondering how can I how can I see the world in a way that this will benefit my art or my creativity. And in a way, it's not even just for art's sake. I think it can be quite a humbling experience as well, just as people, if people learned to be creative in everything that they do, not in the sense of creating something, but in a sense of bettering themselves, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, there's something I wanted to touch on there. Yeah, so you talk about loneliness, and I think that's very interesting, like word, because I think it's a particular type of loneliness. It's the loneliness of not being a part of the story that everyone else has agreed on.
Mm.
Everyone else has an agreed upon story that this is how we live life, this is how you're supposed to do things, here's how you make decisions. So it's a loneliness in the sense that you are saying like, okay, I'm setting that aside. My friend really likes like Arthurian legends, and he likes to talk about the forest adventurous. It's like when they were looking for the Holy Grail, most of that story is them like wandering around in the forest adventurous. We're like, we don't know where the fuck we're going, we're just like, it's getting very comfortable with that and trusting in that. It's like this is what it feels like. I'm going off a path that's like feels comfortable, and I'm wandering. But I will say, it's possible to have companions with you in the forest adventurous. So
Mm.
there is a way that you can actually find kind of a deeper connection and friendship with other co-adventurers that are in that same place. They're like, hey, we're knights searching for the grail. And that actually is that has a better sense of belonging than the belonging of like being part of this other um, normalcy for lack of a better term. So there's that. And I love that's my favorite discovery is like, I want to find other people wandering in the forest. And you find other people wandering in the forest. And you're like, oh, you're wandering in the forest? You're looking for the grail too? It's like, oh, yeah, we're both looking for the grail. It's an amazing feeling. And then what's the other thing you're talking about? You're talking about, oh, yeah, how do you relate to life and use life to apply a life towards your art? So I spent most of my life looking at life as like, how can I use this for art? And there's a way in which by doing that, I actually got in the way of really letting that benefit me. Where it's always like, I'm looking at this tree. Oh, I want to capture this so I can impress people with this cool insight I had about looking at this tree.
Like your analyzing muscles flexing, but your intuition muscles not.
Yeah,
Would you
well,
say?
I would say there's something about it where I was instrumentalizing my experience with life, where my experience with life was only get good insofar as I could use it to create something that would make other people like me, really. Like that's what it comes down to. Like I want to do something where people are going to think I'm cool and they like me and think I'm brilliant. And so I prefer my way of relating to life. You talk about like going out, you know, being with people you love or going on a hike or however you're engaging with life, like learning the skill of savoring life is now kind of like where I'm at, where it's like um relating to something as some sort of sacred object, right? That has its own life and being able to yeah, feel that deeply, experience
Yeah.
that deeply, you know,
Did
and
you,
be like,
did you use the word
I'm gonna be
savor?
here. Yeah, yeah.
That's a really interesting word because, like, if you imagine all the times you're savoring something, you really are taking it in. It's like you're
Mm,
still, you're in the moment, you're
yeah.
savoring it. That's a really good way of looking at it.
So it's sort of like that sort of Christian mindset of
Mhm.
everybody's made in the image of God, so treat them accordingly. Essentially, like they have that ability, they have that creator esque element to it, and then as do you. So how are you meant to treat that? How are you meant to resonate with that? And all of a sudden, passing someone on the street means a completely different thing.
Yeah.
It's not just passing someone on the street. It's having that moment, as you say, it needs to be savored. And it's a precious thing. It's something that is constantly overlooked. It's something. It's called communication. It's essentially saying, here's a moment, but how do I communicate effectively, not with the people I'm sharing the moment with, but what feelings are being developed in that sort of moment. What messages am I receiving from this, and what messages am I sending out to the world, in a very physical form, like a comic book. That was a certainly, as a message that you said needed to be said. It's something that mattered. But even this here conversation that we're having, that's recorded, or even just smaller things like a letter to someone or whatnot. What are these messages? And you said yourself, it was like a message from your past self to your future self. Time flew by. I don't know if you felt that, but here we are in the present.
I even
And
kind of want to kind of correct that a little bit because I don't think it was so much even a message for myself from the past. It feels like a message from something bigger than myself is what I would say. If you want
excellent.
to use the word like something divine, like yeah, that's how it
Mm-hmm.
feels to me where it's like,
Something
oh my God, like
something that mattered. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So, on your note, Ben, of like, how do I walk down the street in a way that's going to further whatever artistic vision you have? Back to what Brandon said, if you're really savoring the moment, you're also not if you're saving in the moment, you're sort of holding on to it a wee bit, but you're not like grasping on it. You can't leave. It's like you're letting it through past you, and you're actually being present there.
Mm.
And there's an aspect of that where again, as Brandon said, it would be a blockage for you to think, how is this going to be used? How
Yeah.
am I going to do this?
Yeah.
My third stanza will do well in this situation.
Yeah.
It's not. So
Yeah.
there's an element where maybe you shouldn't think about it too much.
Yeah.
Really, maybe
You
give yourself some less headaches, maybe along the way. Um,
you really have to drop all of your expectations from whatever you're experiencing, which is it takes time. I mean, for me, I grew up religious and I kind of let that go. I left the church that I was raised in and actually ended up doing a lot of like meditation that came from like a Buddhist background. And it was kind of through that experience that I came to a place where like words like divine and God started making sense to me. But it was through that practice of being like, how can I relate to something without expecting something of it, without demanding of it, or even sometimes having the sense of like, I'm looking at this tree and I want it to be beautiful, and I feel sad because it doesn't feel beautiful to me right now.
Mm.
How can I like let that go and let the experience be precisely what it is? Um, so yeah, it's a process. It takes time to learn to relate in that way. Um,
well, I think it's
but
interesting because it relates back to if when I say when I'm doing my artistic things, when I'm in a flow state, if a flow state, which I suppose is this thing we've been talking about, it's when you're zoned in, you see the through line, the fog's gone, all these other things we've been talking about. It's often come after a time where I've done some deep praying, you know, real
Mm.
deep praying, not like kind of prayers that I'll put off a few things here off my day. It's like you're zoned in. There's like a deep silence, like a stillness
Mm.
kind of praying. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you say stillness, it makes me curious
Yeah.
about like what prayer is like for you. Because I get a sense that it is more about like, thank you for this and please give me this. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I'll open up about myself, I suppose. So we're both Christians.
Mm.
We're not ashamed of that fact. So would love to have a chat about what your perspective is on that as well.
Yeah.
But you know, I suppose let me think. There's one prayer specifically that sort of changed the way I saw prayer, and it's actually from the Orthodox Christians, and it's the Jesus prayer.
Hmm.
And Jesus prayer is basically Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, and that's the prayer, and
Hmm.
that's it, ladies and gentlemen. You can relate that to your breathing in, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. So the idea is you breathe in, it's Jesus Christ, Son of God. Breathe out, I'm a sinner. So it's like more Jesus coming in, sin leaving. And it's basically putting a focus not on yourself, but of Jesus Christ and what, not just Jesus Christ, but what he did for you. And I think you're supposed to just repeat that prayer, and it's kind of idea you're supposed to. It's in your very breath. Now, I'm no saint, I'm no monk, you know. Um, so obviously I'm not perfect, but I do. There's this real stillness I find,
Mm.
especially with that prayer. Now I'm not limiting to that prayer. I've had that experience with other prayers, more informal prayers, not prayers that are sort of pre-planned or written out. But I find it easiest to get into that sort of zone of stillness, of complete calmness when I do that prayer. Just because there's so little, there's no elements to it. There's so few elements to it, but it's like it's zoning in on what's needed. If that does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really cool. It's something that I kind of found out after I finished Green Monk is I had this like vague idea that monks are doing something in monasteries. And I'm like, what are monks doing in monasteries? Like, I don't know, they're writing scripture or something. It wasn't until after when I started researching things more that's like, oh, monks are doing contemplative practice. That's what they do in monasteries. They're there to have this develop this direct connection with God, and it's doing prayers like you're describing. That's what they were doing. And they were on these weird schedules where they're getting up at all hours of the night to pray, so they're kind of interrupting their like normal way of thinking, getting in these like states of mind where they can kind of let these ways of limiting themselves go, whatever you want to call it. And so yeah, I like I have an interest in like mystical practice and what you might call like comparative mystical practice. And so I look at like what these monks were doing, and you look at like Buddhist practices, and you can also look at like Kabbalah or what's in Islam. There's a version of this as well. It's escape like Sufism. And there's people that do this, and you kind of look at these different practices, and it's like you read like Saint Teresa de Avila or Saint John of the Cross, and they're talking about their spiritual practices, and you can look at like Buddhist stuff, and it's like they're kind of talking about the same thing. So I kind of come from this perspective, this ecumenical, mystical perspective, where I'm kind of like, oh, like this connection with the divine, um, this kind of direct connection of the divine can kind of be done in different ways. Um, but then at the same time, there's like, but your path is like the straight and narrow. Like whatever your path is like it's going this way.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if that
Uh,
makes any sense, but yeah.
yeah, absolutely. A thing that reminded me in Green Monk, you have sort of in the beginning, he's learning about the monastery, and the reason it's the blood of the martyrs is essentially it's because you've got the three kinds of monks that were coming in by the Templars. You got the ones who were cowardly and they fled and they were killed first, And then you have the fighters, you know, the ones who, the zealous, we would call them zealous, you know, they're like, no, this can't possibly, and they believe that their anger is righteous. And so they go out and attack, and then they're killed obviously next because they're monks, you know, they're not knights, they're not warriors. But then it was the third kind, the ones who were going to praise until the very end, pray and things like that. And the knights looked at that, they saw the piety, and realized, you know, they were so ashamed of themselves, and then they joined the monastery. And I suppose it's this complete and utter search for goodness, but goodness in its most sort of complete form. I think that's it. This idea of what good is. If you can be that pious and good, that can stop even the most murderous night on a bloodlust. You know, there's that something calming.
I think the word you're looking for is beauty.
Beauty, even.
Beauty.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. And I suppose when we do find ourselves in these moments of stillness, we are essentially reaching out into something and extracting something beautiful and something good because we believe it is for good, if you know what I mean. And you can apply that to yourself, or you can save it for that time. You know, it's very flexible. But it's just an interesting thing to think about, I guess.
So, if I get this correct, you grew up in the Mormon church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, or whatever you call it. So, how do you feel comfortable talking about that experience?
Absolutely, yeah.
How did that affect the stories you were telling, your story writing process? You know, what was it like leaving? Why did you leave? Just all that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good story. Well, I mean, so if you look at the very beginning of the book, it's dedicated to my grandfather, Sharon Reed Dayton. So he was, born 1907. So he was like old school, like classical Mormon patriarch. So he was just like a very devout guy, rural, worked on a ranch, but then he was also the way that Mormonism works. The clergy are all lay clergy. So it's like you don't have any sort of paid clergy, which is part of the ethics of Mormonism. And so he was what you call a bishop for decades, which is kind of the leader of the local congregations that are called wards. And he was a stake president, which is also like that's like a larger, you're kind of a leader of a larger group, but all as a lay person. So very, very dedicated to the LDS church his whole life. He donated land for them to build the church where the town my dad grew up in. There's a church where my grandpa donated land. So it's very much within my my background, growing up in Mormonism, these ideas of authentic spirituality, some sort of like authentic, heartfelt dedication to God. So, and I definitely saw that within my grandfather. But within myself, my experience with the LDS Church was one of a kind of tension where I felt some sort of authentic like connection through Mormonism. You know, I remember reading the Book of Mormon as a young kid and feeling really struck by that. Like this feels important. And as they call it in the LDS Church, they say gaining a testimony where it's like, okay, no, this is true for myself. But feeling this tension of I feel this very personal like dedication or belief, but I felt like the community around me, like it never felt a part of my ward growing up. And then as time went on, I looked at the institution itself. And I was a missionary, like I was a Mormon missionary as a young man. And that was like this opportunity for this closer connection to God throughout the process. But coming in conflict with maybe other with my leaders or like other people I was working with, where I had this very clear idea about what was right and wrong. And they're like, yeah, but this is what the official policy is. And so I would say that if I were to sum up my experience of leaving very simply, although it was a very long and agonizing process, it came down to this tension between my kind of personal, authentic spirituality and this institutional conformity. Like where you have this church that says being good is about doing these rituals, it's about paying your tithes, it's about this and this and this, and we get to judge whether you're doing that well or not, and eventually deciding like, no, I have to trust more in my own spirituality and let that guide me and decide what is true. And so I eventually made the difficult decision to leave. And which was it's before you leave a church, you're always like, okay, it's going to be fun on the other side. I get to party on the other side because I haven't been able to drink or, do drugs or, have sex. And it turns out on the other side, it's very, very painful on the other side. It's as all like stories go, you leave the comfort of home and you go into the wilderness, and it's pretty challenging in the wilderness. Um, but eventually finding in my own way, um, kind of finding like my own treasure throughout that process. You fight some dragons and whatever, and then eventually you're like, okay, I like, at least I don't know if I have the grail in hand, but it's like I can see it hovering off in the distance, and I know the direction. It's like I feel very good about my path in life, spiritual path in life. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that is where you wanted to go, but I'm happy to answer any other questions about the details of that.
Yeah, so you essentially it wasn't something wasn't lining up with, there was a difference between your own personal spiritual life and what they were saying. Essentially, is that and practicing? Is that
Yeah, yeah, and it really comes down to this tension between authority and the spirit. So within the LDS Church, they teach what they call following the spirit, and this is how you know truth is by following the spirit. But at the same time, they say you have to follow the prophet. And then things really get messy when
the
you when
prophet
you
being
ask like,
Joseph Smith? Is that
yeah,
correct?
or
Yeah.
and there's a current leader of the church that's considered the prophet of the church, and you follow your leaders, and then there's a hierarchy. And so being righteous, you're being told that following the spirit is being righteous, but also following, conforming to the system is righteous, and those things eventually come in tension, come into conflict. Um and I had a good friend that actually asked me this question that set me on my course, where he said, what would happen if the spirit told you to leave the church? And that just didn't even seem like a possibility to me at that time. But it eventually led me to asking that question, and I was like, okay, um, just seeing some of the policies they were enacting that I disagreed with. And then at the end of the day, it was something I just felt. I remember just being appointed to a certain leadership position. And when that happened, I just remember being in a meeting and just feeling like my heart is just not in this. And I knew at that point that I'm just like, it's just a matter of time before I leave. Um,
So it was similar to your storyline process. You only see one step ahead of you, but you knew that was the direction.
yeah, that was one of those things where I knew the trajectory pretty clearly
Yeah,
at that
well,
time. And it just took time. I mean, it was hard just to change all these ways I had done things in the past. It was hard to say no to people. I mean, I was raised where you just never say no to people within the context of growing up in this church. So the process of saying no was just very, very difficult. The process of telling my family, that was very challenging. And I had started practicing meditation before I left the church. And so that was another thing where I had been told the church is special because you feel all these special things when you're at church. And I started practicing meditation, and I was like, oh, I'm feeling all this stuff while I practice meditation. And then sometimes I feel it more when I'm practicing meditation than when I'm at church. And so then there's this question is like, oh, is it the church that's doing this thing? Or is it something here that's doing this, that's causing it? So yeah.
I think it's one thing to look out for that may be dangerous, and it's an issue with all these esoteric things you mentioned. Is sometimes you can have this it's almost like a secret spiritual life, and you can it's almost hidden away from the real world, really. And you sort of, I'm not saying that you're doing this, like, but I'd say it's good to go to a church, and like you may say, well, what if I find church boring? It's like, well, it's not the point. It's the fact that it's kind of messy. It's the kind of fact that it's broken, and like it's dirty and messy. It doesn't work. The people have fallen outs here and there, but that's part of your growth, really, as a person, of your trials and tribulations. It's like, do you understand what I'm saying here? It's like
Yeah.
we need to live
It's
together, because that's what it means to love someone. You can't love someone off on your own, doing your own esoteric spiritual life. Although it doesn't deny it, but if it's a life that denies meeting with people, like on purpose because you just don't like it, then it comes into question: are you following a spirit of love? Does that make sense? Like, obviously, we're all not perfect people. We all have our own natural inclination. We all like spending time with people more than others. It's a balancing act. But that's just it is a balancing act with, there's issues and good things on one side, and there's issues and good things on the other side. Another thing I'd say, you got interested in, like, say, Buddhist practices. Did you say meditation, that sort
yeah,
of stuff?
yeah,
And I said you looked across this whole spectrum of esoteric stuff. The problem with that is you can run into another issue of, like, as if you're above all these things and you're not
mm,
necessarily a part of one. You can pick one thing from here, pick what you like from here, and you're not in the story of any.
mm,
And that seems very dangerous because, say you've got, say your story, right? The story of Alex, say the Green Monk.
yeah,
You can't you can't follow the story. You can't be a part of the story pretending that you're not from Alex's point of view or any individual's point of view. You'd be like, oh, I'm above here. Isn't it stupid that he did this because X, Y, Z? Well, you're not living the story because you need. Does that make sense? I'm probably fumbling my words here, but like,
yeah. No, I want to, yeah. So I think you speak to some things that really, really connect with me. And one is this like connection to community and to place and belonging. And one of the interesting things that I've come to is that I actually find more of a connection to Mormonism now. Um, and I don't participate in the LDS church. There still are like issues that prevent me, but I totally acknowledge there's people that can be part of the church and have a very authentic spiritual path there. um yeah, we'll see how this lands on you. I recently have just like watched Moana, and I really like Moana, because I think it captures this narrative very, very nicely. Where she's in within her island, and she's told everything you need is in the island. You don't have to leave the island, you know. But she like has this call. She's like, the sea is calling me. I feel this call, and she discovers that, like, oh, my people were actually explorers. They don't leave the island now, but they used to explore. They used to explore all these different islands, and throughout the entire, and she decides to leave. Right, she decides to leave. Um, but the whole time, she never lets go of the tension. This tension between, I have this call to the sea and I love my island, and that tension like never breaks. She's like, I'm the daughter of the chief, but the sea calls me. And there's this sense, even as there's this song that the explorers sing, and they say, we explore out and find new islands, but we know our way home. So I'm very much with this idea of, how do we explore and how do we leave the safety of home? And you say the word, like, it's dangerous. Like, there is a danger in the exploration. So how do we leave home and but know our way home, and have the ability to bring back some sort of treasure,
yeah,
bring some sort of treasure back home. So I don't know, that's how that kind of lands on me. And I feel this connection now to my heritage in a way that's kind of like revitalized, but it's happened through that exploration where I've left kind of the safe confines of my particular village.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, to bring it back to your Green Monk idea. You have this dying tradition of like an old
Mhm.
monastery full of old men, and he has to leave to,
Yeah.
revitalize the whole situation. And obviously there's a scandal involved in that, and it's not quite sure where to place it. But that, I think that's part of the story. To be honest
Yeah.
with you, but yeah,
I
you
love that you
see,
point out the missing eye of the hegemon. Like that's not
yeah.
something I had really like even intended or thought about. But yeah, like he's
It's
not
just
able to
funny because
see.
like that's something I would do on purpose. Be like, because it's so in your face.
Yeah.
Funny. Um, yeah. What was your opinion in the whole series as a
You know,
whole?
I thought it was lovely. Like I said, it kind of brought up for me this idea of I'm not in the master of my own creations. I mean, people talk about these things about like connecting to the muses or whatever, or being the voice of, and it's not, I'm not like speaking for God or like being a conduit for God, where it's like I'm not trying to say anything. I did try to say something meaningful and clever, but like all the best stuff, I look at it and I feel like I wasn't even conscious of
Yeah,
what was being communicated with a lot of this
as
stuff.
I've been told to.
Yeah, there's all these simple symbols that I was being drawn to or that resonated with me, where it's like I want it to feel this certain way. This seems important, and then afterwards I see like, oh, this is a story about the masculine and the feminine. This is about someone being raised within this law and this order and the constraints of that, and then like being called to creativity and to danger and to risk. And I was not aware of any of that when I was in the process of writing
Yeah,
it. Um, so it's fun to see the analysis. And I mean, you're taking your time to look carefully and closely at like the provenance a lot of these things. It's like I may not be aware of all this history, but no one ever was. I was just reading Jung the other day, and he was talking about how we have this idea that some like priest at some point sat down and says like, I'm gonna like sucker all these people by making up this story, and it never happened that way. It was just like these little bits of stories that emerged that people started telling and that they related to and they passed on and refined, and it all happened like I want to say like unconsciously or in some way that was not intentional. So yeah, it feels like mysterious.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. No, it cracks me up when say you've got some new atheist guy who likes to argue with you, and he says, "Well, look at these stories that have like a similar death and rebirth structure. Therefore, they're all come from some common source, as in like plagiarism kind of common source." And
Sure.
I'm thinking, yeah, that's the point. There it's true. It's true to our very being, and as a Christian myself, Christ
Yeah.
is the totality of all that story. It's the beginning and the end of that whole narrative. It consumes all reality. The Bible says how the Son of God had to descend from heaven and reach the lowest down to Hades and descend up to so he would fill the earth at all levels. It says that straight in the Bible. It's like, well, yeah, man, that's that's exactly what.
I suppose it's wrapping up our every sort of experience that we have under sort of one thing. So one of our episodes is about dragons, and it's
Mm,
essentially the metaphor that every single story is a slaying the dragon story. You've got the dragon, which is the challenge, and you got the push, which is everything would be better off if you defeated the dragon. You can defeat it any way you want. You can slay it or you can befriend it. If you look at How to Shoot Your Dragon, either way, once the dragon's been dealt with, then life is significantly better, not just for you, but for the community. And every story is like that, whether you're overcoming depression or whether you have the tax man chasing you or whatnot. You've got all these different sort of understandings that there's these things, there's these sort of demons and these dragons to defeat in your life. And the wonderful thing about narrative is that we can express those kinds of those ideas within storycraft and within that kind of idea, and with Christianity, it is very much the whole of mankind. And in a lot of, not even in Christianity, because we are mankind, then that is our story. That's what we've developed and understood over thousands and thousands of years. You've got a lot of cultures that believe in, say, the flood. There was this great flood, and then whatever God then happened created this new world out of the total destruction. This idea of the phoenix, the death and the reborn better from the ashes. It's a really, and even in Alexi's dreams, his first dream that he has, he's soaring through the clouds. He's the sword, and he's this free sort of god being, and you're like, what does that mean? It's not literally, let's go through that, but it's more of the fact that we have that capacity to relate to everyone on that kind of, I guess, that spiritual death and reincarnation level, I guess, because we all kind of have in our own stories that kind of part of us. The old me had to die. I had to put on this new self, in order to progress in my journey. That's called character development, but it's so much more than character development when it's real life. That's sort of the whole thing.
Yeah. By the way, Josh, I love that you pointed out as you're saying that the whole idea that he's like Alexi like sheds clothing as this like sign of freedom. It definitely like obviously like there's something I felt about that, the freedom that caused me to do that, but that was definitely not something that was intentional. But when I look back at
It's
it,
such a subtle thing as well, but it's so consistent every single time.
Yeah.
Even to the degree of the time he goes in the cave and there's like crows and stuff. Did I mention the point where he
the hood
hits
gets
his
knocked
head
off
a branch and his hat gets taken off? I'm like, bam, we're in it already. It's like such a subtle thing. It's like what gave you the idea to do that? Is it just like because it's so specific?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It just blows my mind.
It was not intentional, but there's so many things that just like feel right as you're doing them.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking back too about there's this whole thing where Alexi, I don't know if have you guys read the mini comic either? I don't know if you've seen that one.
No, I did. Was the mini comic based on Green Monk?
It came before. It was the first thing they did with it.
Yeah, but it's a
So
similar story. Is it the
yeah,
same
same
world?
character, same character. Yeah.
Yeah,
So part
well,
of
I
his,
haven't even seen
I'll
that,
send you,
so
I'll send you guys a copy. Give me your address. I'll send you a copy.
yeah.
But part of that too is like as he gets into the fight, there's a fight he gets into, and again, like he removes his hood. But like part of his character too is that he's a trickster, and for me, it's like he's this holy man, but he also like he plays tricks to kind of figure out solve his problems, and that happens like in all of his challenges. There's always some sort of like even with the selection of the grass, even that's him trying to be clever. And it's like I don't know why that was important to me, but I even think about my grandpa. That's how my grandpa was. He was this very like pious dude, but he was also like a practical joker. And again, it gets this tension of like the law and also like finding your way of creativity in the midst of that. Um, I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every part of it, it blows my mind. Like it's so disciplined to think about everything needs to be right. Not just
Yeah.
like it needs to make sense. It's just like it needs to be right. What any part of this specific scene could I just change and see the through line? It's just it blows my mind. Um, yeah,
I'm really glad you said trickster there, because like I'm just thinking of every sort of moment, the deer, the kids are like trying to knock it out, 2 hits, and he's like, I'll get 1 hit. Next the kid is like, it's a really fascinating way to think about. It's the idea of trying to, if we look at rules and that structure, that masculinity as a sort of something solid and concise, but he's like a river. He's like, yeah, this is part of me, but I can move around it. I can find a way to adapt and solve, as you said, the problem. And I think that's the key. That's the key concept. It's this idea of problems that need solved, and we need to rely on our own intuition in order to solve them, but also in a way that I guess doesn't break any of the rules that he's been sort of tasked with not breaking. And that's the interesting thing about life and law and order and chaos. It's like we need a little bit of chaos in order to, or a little bit of trickery. We'll say I don't say a little bit of
Yeah,
trickery
yeah,
in order to bypass or solve an issue in our own present life. And it's a very relatable thing, I guess. I do like a good joke, but one of my favorite parts was every sort of interaction he had in the town. It was like all right, okay, this is an interesting. What's he gonna do this time? Very,
yeah.
very.
It makes me remember. I remember reading Nassim Taleb, and he talks about like the correct way to be religious is like if you're going to be religious, you have to understand that part of the game is cheating a little bit. So there's something about like being overly rigid, and dude, Mormons love being super rigid about our religion. Let me tell you. So, but yeah, I think that's part of it. Is like, yeah, there is law, but you do have to cheat a little bit.
Mm.
Um, but of course, like by the end of the by the end of the story, he's like breaking the law wide open. So
Yeah,
that's like
yeah.
they really come to a head there, which I don't know how that plays into all of that. But
I suppose it's so we talk about flexibility and being
mm,
flexible, but there is a point where it snaps. When it snaps, I suppose that's where the true story kicks in.
mm,
Like your
yeah,
man said, go away and save as many lives as you've taken, and that's the mending process. And I love how it ends. I didn't expect it to end like that. Obviously, I would
mm,
like because in our heads the hero comes in, you know, gets rid of all the villains and is praised, but it's the complete opposite. It's
Scandal.
you were flexible, you were bendy. All the lessons that the elder has been telling him, and yet it still breaks and still. And I guess
this
we
is like the
wonder.
paradox of like Adam and Eve in the garden, right? It's
Mm,
like to progress, they were given a rule that they had to break in order to
mm.
like progress. You
Yeah,
know?
Jordan Peterson talks about how what's a better world to live in? A world where there's the possibility of evil, or a world where evil can't happen, where you have no ability to choose. And even in Norse legends, you've got the trickster Loki, but he's creative, and he's got all these laws Odin sets. One story in particular was when they they try and catch Loki in the stream, and they make a net to catch him. And what he does is he turns into a fish,
Mm,
and then that's how sort of they're so wriggly, and he can or no, sorry, I mix it up. When the gods tried to catch him with his hands, he would slip out, he would turn into a fish, and then they
yeah,
made the net to catch him, and that's sort of how fishing. That's why Vikings then like start fishing, and that's the legend behind him. But the need for the net would never existed if Loki didn't trick the gods.
yeah,
That's what progress is. That's what snapping does. When you mend it, we actually get something better and something stronger than than before. And I suppose that's the interesting thing about Green Monk.
And if we really relate that back to Christ, because I don't know if I mentioned at least what I'm going to say now in the series we did, but everything Christ did was like a level scandalous. You know,
mm,
the Jews thought there's going to be some revolutionary kind of guy to save them from the Romans. He wasn't. He was a guy who was not violent at all. They then communion. What is communion? Communion is cannibalism in a sense. It's like this is my body. Eat and remember of me. This is my cup. This is my blood. Drink, remember me. It's like we have this Christian history going back 2,000 years, and we've somehow, the scandal has been lost on us in a wee bit because it's like normal now. It's like our culture, but hang on a minute, that's kind of weird. That's
Mm.
kind of weird, and that's part of the story. More scandals. What
Yeah,
he died. That's the important one. That's quite scandalous. The Son of
yeah,
God becoming flesh and dying. That's a scandal. But all plays into the story.
yeah. I
Uh,
think. also one of my favorite. I don't know if you know this story. It's when so basically the New Testament, the Gospels, it's essentially filled with the teachers of the law trying to trick Jesus into committing some kind of
Yep.
sin. And essentially, they bring the woman over who's accused of committing adultery, and according to the law of Moses, she needs to be stoned. And it's like an impossible situation because if he refuses to stone her, he's disobeying the law. But then if he does stone her, it's like, oh, well, you can't be, you know. But he says, he who is without sin cast the first stone. You know, it's that, you know, the trickery. It's the water on the stone. It's the, I'm not doing anything to the stone. I'm not breaking the stone, but I'm actually, I'm not, is embedded in so many cultures. And it's just that kind of human, you know, real human experience that transcends even our understanding in the present, because people thousands of years ago had this exact same. Well, that's why we have these stories. That's that same narrative. You know, that it's not even just a rise and a fall, but it's something that makes you rise up again.
Yeah. So there's like two themes I want to point out here that I think are really interesting that kind of keep reemerging. And one is like the trickery, you know, the cleverness that gets you kind of through the problem. And the other one is like the crucifixion, you know, or in the Alexi's case, it's like, you know, breaking the law, like to that dramatic extreme. You want to call that scandalous. Like there is this sense in which like solving the problem isn't so much about us being clever, but it's about us being broken, you know? And that feels like very alive for me as well. That just like, that's such an essential part of my narrative has been like, I can't figure this out. And then just being like broken. And then I don't know, they use this metaphor a lot of like light can't come through without like for something being broken, right? And a lot of times we talk about like the heart being broken or something like that. But yeah,
Well,
it's kind of like inevitable. Those are the two things humans have to face, right? We can
yeah,
have the
but
cleverness or we can have the breaking.
the question though is, so you said there, yeah, there's a part of us that needs to be broken in order to solve the problem, but is that then to bring it back together and to make it whole, or is it beneficial to accept that we're broken and we're always going to be broken,
Hmm.
and that's just how, you know, it comes to the understanding that you're not perfect, and it's just because you know that you're not perfect essentially you can move on, or is it something a little bit more, I guess, celestial than that? Is it a pursuit of wholeness? You know, is it a pursuit of something to become whole again, so that you never have to be broken again, so that you can live in a way that's whole? I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to understand, because we can go on and on about trials and tribulations where we need to use a little bit of trickery and that we first need to be broken in order to become stronger, I guess. But when does that end? You know, when do we become this sort of, you know, when do we get to heaven? Essentially, is what
When the
I'm.
light shines
Yeah,
through the crack,
Yeah.
sounds through the crack.
as
You know?
simple as that. You know,
Yeah.
and we
So I
people
mean,
back to I'm gonna
it
use a
goes
great.
back to being it goes back to
Sorry.
like what I was saying about being an artist. I don't know if that's me where you were like I had this definition of being an artist and I had to be broken. I mean, me completing Green Monk was actually an excruciatingly painful experience for me.
Mm.
I had this horrible midlife crisis after I was done with Green Monk. I ended up going into like I did couples therapy with my wife for months and months and months. Like it was this excruciating pain where I was at this point in my life where I was like, what am I doing in life? Why am I here? Like, why am I things should be perfect and why am I miserable? And I had to let go. And it was a painful experience of letting go, but I had to be broken and let go of my definition. And you know, you say like, is it towards a new wholeness? And I think in a sense it is, but it's like it's a bigger wholeness. You're saying like, okay,
Mm.
actually, this is you're seeing from a new perspective, right? Like, oh, this is a bigger picture than I thought it was,
Mm.
you know? And I do think it is like a series of breakings though. You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
keep going back and you're like, okay, what am I still holding on to? What is still like causing me suffering? Um, you know, and I think there's both like there is a Christian version of this idea of what you know Buddhists might call like not self, right?
Mm.
And it's more of kind of in relation to God. I've heard Christian mystics talk about it, like whatever oneness with God is. And this is me kind of, you know, from the little I know. but it is kind of about a breaking of self and a letting go of self in the face of that, I think.
Yeah. In the Christian sense, it's about bearing your cross, essentially bearing your burdens. You know, becoming a Christian doesn't clear things up. It's actually you're just going to endure, you know, if not more suffering sometimes.
Hmm.
In all walks of life, you will be. Doesn't matter what you believe in. There's going to be taunters. There's going to be people who don't, you know, understand where you're coming from. Certainly people who will not be bothered having conversations like this.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, can I miss it
yeah,
by linking the two things you said? So we had this cave idea. There's a crack in the cave. The
Yeah.
light shines through. What
Yeah.
does that mean? It means we can see what's in the cave, and sometimes,
Hmm.
maybe that's not it. Maybe that's not the end all be all. As you said, there's multiple breakages. But what happens when we see in the cave? We see all the other problems that they'd fix. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you think, well, as long as I get the light in the cave, well,
yeah,
open the cave. Oh my goodness!
yeah. So
Wow,
Yeah.
what's in here, ladies and
exactly,
gentlemen?
exactly.
And then you clear all that out, and there's another crack. And eventually, in the Christian way of putting it, you can call that like sanctification or theosis. It's because it's breaking down that barrier and relate it back to Moses. He had to take off his sandals to get to the burning bush. Why? Because that was his coverings. You need to take off your coverings, like as we've mentioned in Grey Monk, how that's a recurring theme. You need to take off your what's blocking you from God. Obviously,
Yeah.
remove that, and part of the Jesus story. He died, to defeat to satisfy the old covenant of the law of and sin bringing sin, the fruit of sin being death. The law, all of the law could bring was death. He fulfilled the old covenant, rips the curtain in two, the covering, ladies and gentlemen, that stopped the Holy of Holies being in contact with the general people. Is this covering from the Lord that's ripped in two. That's like, again, as you said, you had this image of like the eye. I'd be like, I would put that in if I was like, which I think is so obvious, man. Um, but yeah, it all
It's
relates together, I think.
C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you're familiar with C.S. Lewis. I'm a big C.S. Lewis fan, but he says, Christian, I'm a Christian not just because I see the sun rising, but because by it I can see everything else.
Hmm.
And it's not actually being what he means by that. Well, my interpretation of that is not a Christian because he can see the amazing glory of the sun, but because he can. It's actually a worldly perspective. He looks down on the world and he can see it in a brighter, sort of new perspective. He can see wrongs. Like it's the idea that sin is uncovered. It's been unmasked.
And
Hmm.
yeah, I was
That's
going
a
to relate
really
it back to what you said,
yeah.
because you said about bearing your cross, right? And what does Jesus say? He says his yoke is easy, his burden is light, and he says, pick up your cross and follow me. Obviously we are told to be like Christ. Christ died. You know, how do we all fit these things together? We've got the coverings being gone, okay, which means we've got access to God now. What does that mean? We've got the fact that the Lord died to do that, and we have to mimic Him now. Oh no, we have to mimic the guy who died on a cross, and that's supposed to be easy. That's like
Hmm.
how does that all fit together? And it's back to what you said at the very start of, or I don't know how long ago, about following the Spirit. It's the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. If that makes sense, it's why what the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, the law says adultery is bad. Okay, the spirit of the law is if you look on a woman with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart. You
Hmm.
know, the law is if you murder someone, that's bad. The spirit of the law, if you hate someone, you've committed murder in your heart. It's this basically I could go on and on about this stuff,
He
but
has he
So I
has
want
and
to.
I, and I have, but it's the idea that you're no longer slave to sin. What does that mean? If you're a slave to sin, it's you can't help but be servant to sin. Okay, and if you're now no longer slave to sin, you're a slave to God. You can't help but do His will, if that makes sense. So that's what
Yeah.
makes it easy. You don't need to teach someone to be sinful because in most cases, you know, unless they're like a saint, obviously. But you know, from the get go, you're raising your kids. You don't need to teach them to be sinful because you know they're already slave to sin. That's their natural way. The burden of being sinful is light for them. If that makes sense. But since Christ, that it flips it on its head. You know, through this process of sanctification, removing of coverings, you know, the burden's supposed to be light.
If I were to condense it down, sort of. Oh yeah, no, continue, please.
I want to, yeah, this, you said something, this all connects to, I'm thinking of C.S. Lewis as well. So the Great Divorce, I think there's a wonderful metaphor in the Great Divorce where it's those that go into heaven. When they're first in heaven, it's painful to be in heaven. They walk on the grass, and the grass is like so real and so true that it causes excruciating pain to walk on the grass. And I think this is a metaphor that's very related to what you talk about, the crack opening up and seeing the light illuminating inside. I very much see the spiritual path as this, like the illumination, and it's like, okay, we've got to walk on the grass. And like, what is the process of going from a place where you want to sin? And I mean, I may conceive it in a different way, but essentially it's the same thing, to actually the momentum moving in the other direction where it's easy. Says my cross is easy to bear. My cross is easy, or my burden is easy, or what, I can't remember exactly.
Yoke is easy, right? Burden is light.
My yoke is easy, right? Pick up my cross. He's saying something that's like a totally embodied thing. He's saying like, yes, when you learn how to do that, the momentum actually goes in the other direction where it does become easier to do that. You know, and that's like the arc of spiritual practice, is the more you shine the light in places, you go through a period where it's painful. It's like, Jesus, I do not want to have to look at this. It's like, I don't want to have to look in detail at what my sexuality is, you know, but if I want to act morally with some sort of like moral sexual boundaries, I've got to shine some light in there. And that's not something that's fun to look at. And that it applies to all other parts of life, where the more you shine light into areas that don't want to be seen, like the more painful it is. But also it's like, with time, that becomes like a nourishing process. Like you talk sanctification, you talk about that process of sanctification. And there's the image I like to think of where it's this process of inclusion, where if you want to say things become more illuminated, I feel it as like it's this process of opening love to encompass more and more things. Where you're like, oh, this is all love. Like this is all, everything that I am is already completely, totally loved. Like right down to the bone.
It's turning the heart of stone into a heart of flesh, as it's put.
Three things. Sorry. There's three things.
He's a good Presbyterian. 3 points for you.
No, just really.
Are
you guys? I have to ask. Are you guys a different denomination that you guys?
I grew up Presbyterian. I don't know, like culturally, I would say like yourself. I have such a connection. I feel like I can't leave. I can't leave my whole back. You know, I need to go back to the Dragons. You know, figure out what's going on back there. I don't know what I am denominationally wise. I would say I'm a Christian, but I also value what the Orthodox say. I value what Catholics say. I value what a lot of Protestants say. And at the end of the day, a lot of the differences it's a lot of miscommunication and disagreement, which is why I find it so hard to relate to a lot of the people I know, actually, because most people are normal people. They don't worry about the about doctrinal kind of things, but you know, I'm a strange person and I worry about these things. But I'm just struggling through figuring it out.
And I really related to when you were telling your story about you leaving your church, because I grew up in Reformed Presbyterian, which is Presbyterian cranked to 11. And basically what happened was one by one, I'm part of a big family, and one by one my family left, but I refused. I was like, no, this is I was very like turning into like an elder, you know. But there was one or two things that I didn't quite understand, and I went and talked to my minister about it. And to basically put a long story short, 2 years worth of arguments and disagreements essentially developed from that. You know, and I was like, this is not an environment. I grew up enough to know the basic principles, but now I'm in an environment where somebody is actively trying to change sort of what I originally thought. And what that did was that, well, it affected me in a very negative way. I left my church and I just decided to say have free reign, you know, just be like, you know what, if that's what that is, I don't want any part of it. And that became one of the darkest sort of periods of my life. And essentially what happened was I ended up going to my parents' church that they went to. And I slowly but surely, I don't want to say rebuilt, I want to say sort of reconnected. So they were always sort of there in the back of my head, you know, there was always things that I was like, actually, I'll not go anywhere near that because of the basic kind of morality and principles that I was brought up with. And then I joined a new church and I found very quickly just how, not only how wrong I was, but how different the perspective was. Because, and this goes back to those three things I was talking about. Uh, the more righteous you become, I think in the starting phases, or you become more aware and more guilty, I guess, of your sin. You know, you're like, I'm trying to be righteous, but there's all these things holding me back. But then with Christianity, you get to a point where Christ died for those sins. Move on, you know, remember them, but move on. And it's like you said, walking on grass is painful. It's acknowledging, you know, because it's not the grass that's causing them pain. It's the sinfulness of them. It's they're not used to such purity.
Well, it's
such
not just the
beauty.
sinfulness; it's the still grasping on
Yeah.
the old self. And
Grasping on.
here's the thing, right? So I'll use, like, you brought up C.S. Lewis. I'll keep with ideas he's mentioned before. You know, you could say, why would I be a Christian? And someone might say, you'll live forever. And I'll be like, yes, but here's the funny thing. Even in the Christian story, no one gets out of dying. Okay, so either you die because, you know, you die in your sins, you don't repent, you sort of hold on to your sinful self, you don't want to be fixed, you're burned up because, you know, it's a painful, but you don't want to let go, so you're going to be burnt up. But there's also a sense where, well, you do need to go through a dying process. That's what repentance is. Dying is letting go of that stuff. And, you know, in that way of thinking about it, C.S. Lewis says, you know, the gates of hell are locked from the inside. Okay. And I think that's completely true, because it's a rejection of God. It's not like, that's the only way I can think of saying it. It's a rejection of God. Keep him out, lock him from the inside. I don't want to be changed. And the opposite of that is, I'm removing all the coverings. You know, fix me.
But there's something in that.
Before you go on, because I need to finish that. Both are the same elements. Both are fire, but the difference between purifying fire and fire that is hellfire that destroys is the same source. It's the fire of God, but one is sanctification, because you're letting go of that. You're not letting it burn you up by you be like, no, I want to hold on to this. The other way is you want to hold on to it and you're being burned up. But both, it's the same thing. It's both fire. What were you saying?
I'm just, if it's just to condense it, because we're talking about a lot of spiritual things. Alexei, at the end of his journey, you know, at the end of his story, he goes on this, you know, journey, you know, this pilgrimage, and essentially he's still going to live with, he's still going on he doesn't rebel, you know, he doesn't become a time, you know, or you might have different plans. I'm not writing the story for you, but in my head, you know, he's going to fulfill what was asked of him. He's still going to live by the rules that's right. He's still going to be trickster. He's still going to be like that. But it's that idea that he has that sort of the building blocks of his principles. And that, I think, is so key on why, I guess, religion and spirituality is so important and so fundamental. You know, the teachings of our elders, it's so fundamental because it's what they were taught by, and that their elders and their elders, and it's what moves us essentially forward. I don't know if you know this book. Have you heard of The Pilgrim's Progress?
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
this is probably my favorite book of all time. There's many, many, many versions. It was first published in 1678. So, but the story of the Pilgrim's Progress is it's just such a pure form of art because characters are named after, well, they're characters, you know. So you've got somebody called Help who helps people, and you've got somebody called Evangelist, evangelizes to people. The story is essentially it's the human story in a human's experience with God and Christ. And what it is essentially you've got this guy called Christian, and he discovers one day that he has this huge burden on his back, and he can't get it off, and he's ashamed of this burden. And he lives in a city called Destruction, and he finds a book, and it happens to be the Bible, and he realizes that destruction is going to get destroyed. And he's trying to convince all of his family to come with him to try and rid of this burden and save the city. But none of them believe him because of how sort of grotesque he looks. Basically, it follows his journey, and it's a massive metaphor, not just for, I guess, a Christian, but it's also just people's walk through life. Because, as you've said, you've had spiritual experiences, God-like experiences, and that's exactly what happens in the Pilgrim's Progress. So I would really encourage you to. I wouldn't really recommend this version. This version's kind of like a
Old English.
it's Old English, but also it's a study version. So it connects. I mean, maybe you'd like that, but it connects all of the kind of moments that are said and links it directly to passages in the Bible that you can read. So basically, it's consistent with Scripture. Because why would he write a story about Christians that isn't consistent? So that's the version I have, and it's brilliant. But my mom used to read me like a children's version when I was younger, and that's when I fell in love with it. There's millions and millions of different kinds of versions, but honestly, it's just such a really good and raw way of thinking about life and humanity. And as Josh said, I'll spoil it. There's no there is death. There is death, and basically, how do you get to heaven is you need to die. But we can that could be a whole other video essentially. But I really really recommend it. It's done wonders to me. So yeah, it's worth a look at.
And one
Cool,
thing I
thank
want to
you.
ask you about before we wrap things up is so you're talking to John Bijot. Are you familiar with his work on the God's Dog graphic novel?
Yeah, that's how I got tied in with him. Is yeah, he reached out to me about maybe doing some work with that. So I've read it, yeah, and you kind of told a little bit of the story of the character as well in the analysis. Can't remember the name of the saint.
Saint Christopher.
Saint Christopher, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I've got the
um,
PDF of it as well. I'll probably do another similar series that I've done with Grumont for it. But yeah, I just want to get your opinion on. So obviously you thought it was a very important that you told the Green Monk story. I think in general it's important to tell the important stories, and we're thinking, why is it important to tell the important stories? What effect does telling stories have on each other? Because I feel like it's a subtle effect, and I don't know where to put my finger on it, and obviously that's part of the mystery of it. I don't know where to put the finger on it, but I'm just wondering what if you've got any insight on the importance of stories. I suppose because you can tell
yeah,
a story and be like, oh, that I really I resonated with
Yeah,
that story.
it's like the Tailor's Daughter. Like the message at the end of that, it's so simple. It's do good to others and good will come to you. That's the story of the animals who turned into them, and they live sort of happily ever after, and all their brothers and all the people around them.
Spoilers.
Such a
so
such a huh?
Says spoilers.
Oh yeah, it's such a simple message, but it's presented in a way of importance and memory. And I think
And it's
that's
better than a list of principles that you read, memorize. Do you know what I mean? That's surely that's got to have something to do with it because we live in stories, right? We
yeah.
don't live in abstract laws and rules and principles. We live in stories. I'm just wondering
I
what do
think
you think about that?
yeah. So I've got a thought here, and that is the way. So everything I'm trying to think about figure out my way into this. I'll tell a story. So when I was going through kind of my midlife crisis, um, I ended up picking up a copy of Wizard of Earthsea. I don't know if you guys have ever read that. You guys familiar with that? Ursula Le Guin.
Heard of it? Is it a fantasy novel? Is
It's
it?
a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
I read it, and the second I picked it up, first page, I was electrified, and I was like, "This is a story I need to read right now." I read it through, and immediately I like started at the beginning, and I read it again, just like 2 times all the way through. Like there was a sense in reading that book where it was like, "This is exactly what I need in my life." I lost you
No,
guys.
don't worry. Don't worry.
Continue.
Don't worry. Just continue.
The darkness.
Go back
So-
down. There we go. Sorry. I'm distracting you. Sorry.
That's okay. You guys getting the camera back online?
Yeah, I just ran out of battery.
Okay, there we go.
so-
All right. And I want to share that just to share how powerful an impact the story had on me. And the story really told me exactly what I needed to do in my life. It's essentially the story of a young wizard who, in his arrogance, calls forth a shadow beast into existence. And then the whole rest of the story is this creature, and he goes to all of his mentors. He's learning to be a wizard, and they're all like, "We don't know how to defeat this thing. We've heard stories of it, but in all of our wisdom, there's nothing that tells us how to defeat this creature that you called into existence. We know it has its and all the magic is like based on like names. So if you know the true name of something, you have power over it. And they're all like, we don't know this thing's true name, yada yada yada. So the next like half of the story or more is just him being chased by this creature, being hounded by this creature, and he's like, how do I escape from this thing? And it's just misery. He ends up taking refuge in this northern kingdom that has special magic that protects him, but there's a sense there's something deeply wrong about like this place where he's like protecting himself. And finally he makes a run for it. He's getting chased down, he loses everything, and he ends up on the doorstep of his master, and he says like, I have just lost everything, I can't defeat this thing. His master basically gives him a pep talk. And finally, at this point, this is the midpoint of the story, he realizes the answer. He's like, oh, I need to chase this thing. I need to hunt this creature down. And he leaves this note on his master's door that says, Master, I go hunting. And he leaves out on his boat, and he says, like, I don't know how this is going to work. I'm going to drag, if I have to just like grab this thing and drag it to the bottom of the ocean, I'm chasing this thing down. And it lit the switch in me where I'm like, oh, I need to stop ignoring everything in my life that I'm terrified of, and I need to turn around and face it. And so there's a real power in stories, and trusting in stories as being far more than entertainment. And I will say that experience completely changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life as someone that I was before that point, and before certain changes, clinically depressed, to now someone where I absolutely love my life. I have an amazing life. And there's something about stories that they're about teaching us how to look at the world. That's what a good story does, is it transforms our way of looking. There is this idea, obviously, from like Catholicism of transubstantiation. And I think the best stories, that's what it does to how we relate to the world. It doesn't transform things, but there's a transubstantiation.
Yeah,
where we're suddenly like, oh,
as well. Yeah.
This isn't a bunch of stuff. It's like the world isn't just a bunch of stuff for me to manipulate. It's not a game of Minecraft where this is stuff for me to put together to make into things. It's suddenly like, oh, there's sacredness in the world. And that's what I see, like the purpose of stories is it's a pointing out to us, like, this is the way to look at this thing.
That's an excellent way of putting it. Yeah, that's exactly right. I would 100% agree with that. Stories do have that effect, especially fantasy novels. There's something we can apply ourselves to, but not in a way that this is literally me. It's something that I guess action novels and stuff can't really. It's like read it for a good read, but a fantasy novel really gives you that. I guess that state of stillness. You sit and you read a book and you understand. I think that's the key thing, is you understand not just the story, but where you're at this moment in time.
But I think it's interesting that what you've yes, stories can affect us this way, but if you're writing the story from an author's perspective, if you have that with the intent, it's almost not going to work. Which is
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, right now I just feel like I need to focus on some artistic endeavor.
Accountability.
It's going to take the form of music for better or worse. But yeah, I think this is a good point to wrap up. It's honestly pleasure speaking to you, Brandon. We had so many technical difficulties at the start. You can see the microphones are in the background. We had all set up, ready to go 2 hours beforehand. Then 10 minutes, I heard it. Boom. Oh, where's the signal gone? Okay, need to mate, my goodness.
Yeah, but we're honestly so delighted to have you, and thank you so much for giving us your time as well. And really appreciate that. And yeah, just take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, awesome. Can't wait for the for the next Green Monk. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, or the work you're doing with John Peugeot as well. Yeah.
So it's been a privilege, guys. Thank you.
100%. And until next time.